So let's have an interesting discussion. Driving your car. Driving is a right. It is a right protected by the Constitution. It is not a privilege. The states would like you to think it's a privilege. They have stolen your right from you and given it back to you under the false concept of privilege. They're wrong. What they're doing is illegal. It's very important to remember that courts do not determine right and wrong. Courts do not determine what is or is not constitutional. Courts determine what will be enforced. And if enough bad people enforce the wrong thing, then the wrong thing becomes law. That law is wrong, that law is illegal, but it's still enforced. Drug dogs are not probable cause. They never were probable cause. They aren't probable cause. They never will be probable cause. Yet they are enforced as probable cause because the courts are wrong and the courts have decided, too bad, we want that to be that way, and not enough people resist them to correct it, to make it right. So that becomes de facto law, even though it's illegal and unconstitutional. Now, having a right does not mean that it cannot be regulated. So, for example, a driver's license is not unconstitutional. We're going to get into both of those things. And I'm going to prove to you, using the Constitution itself, the only thing here you're allowed to use as evidence. Because, let's see, where is it here? Is this the one? Where is supremacy? I believe it's this one. Yeah, here we go. So this is Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States. What is the Constitution of the United States? The Constitution is not a religious document. It is a legal document. It is the only reason our government is permitted to exist. In order for our government to exist as a lawful entity, it must be in compliance with this document, with the Constitution of the United States of America. If it is not in compliance with the Constitution of the United States of America, it is unlawful, it is illegal, it is unconstitutional. It is not a valid government, at least that portion that's violating the Constitution. So the primary portion here, the Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, okay, we're going to get back to that later, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, we'll get back to that later as well, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. What that literally means is that the law of the United States is the Constitution. Not courts, not precedents, not laws passed by Congress later, not laws passed by your states or your locals or your counties or the feds later. The only law in the United States is the Constitution. You say, well, what about making other laws? Those laws must derive their authority from the Constitution. Read what it says there. And the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof. Meaning they have to derive their authority from the Constitution. And judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Meaning the judges shall be required not to uphold the laws of the United States, but to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and only any laws that are in pursuance thereof, that are in compliance with the Constitution. So this one here, I think it is. So a law repugnant to the Constitution is void, with these words written by Chief Justice Marshall, the Supreme Court, for the first time declared unconstitutional, a law passed by Congress and signed by the Constitution. Now, this site actually gets it wrong. It says nothing in the Constitution gave the court the specific power. You notice this is a .gov address. That's because the government doesn't like this restriction. So this gives them wiggle room to say, oh, we can revoke this later. Nothing in the Constitution gave the court the specific power. Oh, yeah? It says it right here. And the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. It's right there in the Constitution. It says it in black and white right there. But I believe it's also here. Judicial review. Here we go. Article 3 says the federal judiciary has the power to make judgments in all cases pertaining to the Constitution, statutes, and treaties of the United States. That's not implied. It literally says it. The Constitution and laws in pursuance thereof. That's the part we just read. All officials of the federal and state governments, including all judicial officers, both of the United States and the several states, shall be bound by oath of affirmation to support this Constitution. So this is not implied. It says it in black and white. They like saying implied because they don't like having this restriction placed upon them. But these are the actual words of Article 6. This is not implied. It literally says it. And the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. I mean, it literally says it right there in black and white. There's no implication here. The Constitution is explicit, not implicit. It means what it says and only what it says. And if it doesn't say it, you're not allowed to imply it. It has to actually say it. And this actually says it. Now, what rights does the government have? None. The government has no rights. You don't get rights as the government. We, the people, have rights. You, the government, have powers and authorities. From where do you derive those powers and authorities? You derive them from the people via the Constitution. So this is made very clear in the 9th and 10th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Why did they have to create a 9th Amendment that says that? What is the reason for creating the 9th Amendment? It sounds like they're saying the same thing twice, doesn't it? It's redundant. Why are they saying this in the 9th Amendment? Because even when we were creating the Constitution, the government was trying to take more power than it had authority to, and we had to remind them with the 9th Amendment, you have no power. All rights belong to the people. The only power and authority the government is ever allowed to have are those that we grant to them via the Constitution. Well, can't they just make a new law to give themselves new powers? No, because the laws have to be made in pursuance thereby, meaning under the Constitution. So in order for the government to give itself a power, it must already be able to derive that kind of power from the Constitution. It can't just create a new constitutional power. And they also can't use an amendment to usurp an amendment. So, for example, they can't repeal the First Amendment, because repealing the First Amendment would be violating the First Amendment, and the First Amendment says they can't do that. Congress shall make no law. That is an absolute statement. An amendment is a law, and it would be violating Congress shall make no law. That right is absolute. Now, we go further because, again, the politicians at the time weren't getting it clear in their head that you have no power here except that which we give you. The 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. What that literally means is what I just said. All rights belong to the people. No exceptions. All rights start with the people. The only powers, not rights, powers the government has are those delegated to the government by the Constitution that are not otherwise prohibited by the rights of the states or the people. So all rights belong to the people first, states second, federal government third and last. And the only powers they do have are those delegated specifically to them by this Constitution, and anything added to this Constitution must be derived from a delegated power in this Constitution. That brings us back to the 9th Amendment. The enumeration in this Constitution of certain rights, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So why is driving a right? Because it's not a delegated power in the Constitution to the government. Therefore, it is a retained by the people right. It says it right there. The 9th Amendment cannot, 9th and 10th Amendment cannot make it any more clear that driving is a right, not a privilege. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So driving is automatically a right of the people, unless you can show me in the Constitution where the federal government is delegated or the state government is delegated this authority in their respective constitutions. And keep in mind, any laws that they create to give themselves this power must be derived from an existing power in the Constitution. They can't just make up a new power. That means flying is a right. That means driving is a right. That means taking a spaceship to the moon is a right. That means taking a starship to Mars or Sagittarius is a right, not a privilege. Now, with great power comes great responsibility, and the founders understood this. So why, if a driving is a right, do I require a driver's license? Now, in our current system, it's because they've created unlawful laws and they've taken away your right to drive. But in my system, in a constitutional system, you would still be required to get a driver's license to drive. Where is that power derived from? Let's see, here we go. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. It's the preamble to the Constitution. It's the very first part of it's the first words of the Constitution. You pick up a copy of the Constitution, those are the first words you read. That is the law. Okay? That's literally the law. So one of the powers delegated to the federal government is to provide the general welfare. We commonly refer to this as provide for the common good. This is why they're able to apply speed limits. This is why they're able to put up traffic lights. This is why they're able to have any other driving law that is reasonable. There's some that are illegal, but for most of them, this is why we have these, why they can require inspections. This is why they can stop you for an out taillight or an out headlight, right? Because they are emburdened with the duty of providing for the general welfare, to provide for the common good. Driving is fucking dangerous. Okay? Human beings are not designed to go flying down a road at 60 miles an hour in a 2-ton metal cage. We're not designed for it. Our brains can't do it. Literally, your brain can't do it. You can't drive. You can't drive a 2-ton vehicle safely down the road. It's not possible. The only way to make driving possible is to have driving occur in a very structured environment to compensate for the biological limitations of a human being. The same thing happened with horses and buggies. A horse and buggy is the analog of a car. It's the same thing. The only difference is one's biological and one's mechanical, and one's a cyborg, because one's half horse and half mechanical. All right, so we had biological, cyborg, and now mechanical. Okay, it's all the same thing. It's just a different analog of the same thing. So if you're saying, well, cars didn't exist, yes, they did. They were called horse and buggy. All right, your sports car was a horse, a Mustang, and your family sedan or van was your wagon, your covered wagon on the back. Okay, that was your family sedan or your van. Your donkey was your 4x4. Okay, these all have analogs. All the things we have today are analogs of things we had before. That's why there's a lot of generalities in the Constitution, so that it does not have to be updated. The Constitution covers the core concept. It doesn't cover things that are specific. It doesn't get specific because specific would become obsolete very fast. I mean, very fast. Technology just expands very quickly, especially at that time and age. They understood this. That's why the Constitution is based on core concepts. It's based on the basic building blocks of these things, and not. That's why it doesn't say you have the. That's why it doesn't say you have the right to keep a flintlock pistol and a knife. It says you have the right to keep and bear arms. Because even then, they already had repeating rifles with 20-shot magazines you could load into them. They actually had repeating magazine-fed ball and powder muskets back then. They already had those during constitutional times. Those already existed. Cannons existed, ballistic weapons, and what do you call that? Artillery existed in the constitutional times. Trust me, the weapons we have then make the weapons we have today seem like pussycats. Go try to fire a cannon through a crowd of people. See the kind of devastation you'll cause. You'll think the guy with the AR-15 is a pussycat in comparison. And a good team can reload that cannon in like 30 seconds. They can get off 4 or 5 devastating shots that will cause hundreds of people to be dead within blocks before anybody can get to them and stop them. Okay, so don't give me any crap. Same thing applies to all of this. So the government does not have the right to take away your right to drive and give it back to you as a privilege. I've just shown you with no ambiguity, using the actual supreme law of this country, that driving is a right. Because you don't understand how the Constitution works. The Constitution is a document of restriction. It is not a document of grant. The Constitution does not give you rights. You have no Second Amendment rights. You have no First Amendment rights. You have no Fourth Amendment rights. We call it those things because grammatically it's easier to do. But the reality is those statements are wrong. There is no such thing as the First Amendment right of free speech. Read what the First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's the separation of church and state, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech. It does not say, First Amendment, the people have the right of free speech. It does not say that. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting or abridging the freedom of speech. It's not giving you the right of free speech because it's a right. You can't grant a right. A right simply exists. You have the right of free speech because you exist. The First Amendment does not grant that to you. The First Amendment is a restriction, not a grant. Congress shall make no law. That's a restriction. That is telling Congress, hands off. You can't mess with this. You can't establish a religion. You can't mess with free speech. You can't mess with religious freedom. You can't mess with the press. You can't mess with the right of the people to peaceably assemble or to petition the government for redress. Basically, us to tell the government, we don't like what you're doing. Protesting is a right, not a privilege. Protests don't work, but that's a whole other topic. The Constitution does not grant these rights. It recognizes that these rights exist, and it forbids the government from interfering. Now, because it's recognizing certain rights, they created the Ninth Amendment to make it clear that your rights are not limited to those enumerated in the Constitution. All rights belong to you, because all rights derive from the people. The government has no rights. In Europe, you don't have rights. You're a subject. The government has power, and the government grants you privilege. Here in the United States, in theory, because it hasn't worked this way for over 100 years, in theory, the government has no power. The people have all the power, and we grant the government power and authority under these rules. We say, we will permit you to do this, this, and this, and here are the rules of how you may function. Here is your ROE, your rules of engagement. This is what you are allowed to do, nothing outside of this. So any law the government creates must be derived from a delegated power in the Constitution. If that law is not derived from a delegated power of the Constitution, then it's unconstitutional. And as per the supreme law of the land, it's null and void on inception. Technically, you don't have to follow that law. It's null and void. The problem is the courts have big sticks, and they use those sticks to force you to comply with laws that are illegal. This all came from a conversation about implied consent when you get a driver's license, which is complete and total bullshit. It's lunacy that that's even allowed, that that's even vaguely legal, since it's on its face illegal. So where else can we go from here? So the government does not have the right to take away your right to drive, unless they can derive that right from a power in the Constitution. And one of the powers in the Constitution is that they, the preamble, where's that? Here we go. Promote the general welfare. Basically, provide for the common good. Okay? Driving is dangerous. It's very dangerous. I mean, you're moving, even on horseback, you're moving a 900 to 1,400 pound animal plus the weight of the rider, at 30, 35 miles an hour. You run into a crowd of people, people die. Okay, so having restrictions on that would fall under the delegated power of provide for the general welfare. That does not mean convert your right to drive into a privilege to drive. That means provide consequences if you do things that are unsafe. Rights are unlimited. You cannot apply a limit to a right, because the moment you apply a limit to the right, your right is limited to whoever makes the list of limitations. Now, a common example of this, it's actually a myth. I don't think this ever actually happened anywhere in the country, but it's grown a mythology of its own. So even though this is actually a myth that never actually happened as far as I'm aware, it's a very good example because we all understand it. You'll all understand it as soon as I say it. Yelling fire in a theater. It is not legal for any governing body in this country to make it illegal to yell fire in a theater, because yelling fire is speech, and freedom of speech is absolute. The First Amendment does not say Congress shall make no law except. It says Congress shall make no law, period. End of discussion. No extensions, no exceptions, no unless it's this, or maybe if it's this. It says shall make no law. Now, why would they make that right absolute? Why was it so important? Because the moment you say these words are okay and these words are not okay, your right is limited by whoever's in charge of those two lists. And you know what we all talk about when we say NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. So eventually you're going to get enough people who are going to be hyperpolarized or brainwashed or too stupid or too dense, and they're all going to agree, and that's when you run into problems with democracy. When the democracies last exactly as long as it takes the people to realize they can vote themselves anything they want. How's that working for you in Congress? It's an operating democracy. It's working great, isn't it? Democracy's bad. Democratic principles? Good. Democracy? Bad. Democracy is worse than communism. At least in communism, you know you're in communism. With democracy, you think you're in charge and you're not, because you just have groups of people being manipulated. So the right to free speech has to be absolute. Your rights have to be absolute. What you do with those rights is not absolute. I have the right to keep and bear arms. I have the right to walk down the street with a knife. But if I stab you with that knife without cause, I'm going to jail. But wait, I have the right to carry a knife. How can I go to jail? Because they're not putting me in jail for carrying a knife down the street. They're putting me in jail for what I did with it. I stabbed you. What I stabbed you with doesn't matter. It could be a stick off of a tree. It could be my finger through your eye socket. It doesn't matter. I stabbed you unjustly. That's what you go to jail for, not for carrying a knife. Well, the same thing applies to speech. You can't make a law that says can't yell fire in a theater, because that violates the First Amendment. Your law has to address the action. Your law has to address promote the general welfare. It can't go after the words. And saying you can't yell fire in a theater is going after the words, which the First Amendment says you cannot do. So what you do is you make a law that goes after the action, what you do with the with your right to free speech. Well, what possible reason could you have to yell fire in a theater? Well, the bad guy just killed a whole bunch of people, and the good guy's aiming the rifle at him, and everybody in the theater says, fire, 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 because they want him to kill the bad guy. There you go. That was easy. Took me about 3 seconds. Okay. So the law you would make, if that was necessary, we probably already have laws on the books covering this. The law you would make is that you would make it illegal to incite a panic without cause. You have to have the without cause part there too, because laws are supposed to require intent. There has to be an intent to harm. Well, there's supposed to be an intent to harm. Statutory offenses, in my opinion, are unconstitutional. All offenses should require intent. If there's no intent, there's no crime, period. There might be an infraction, there might be a failure, there might be a problem, but it wouldn't be a crime if there's no intent. So it would be inciting a panic without cause. How I incite the panic doesn't matter. Just like how I stabbed you doesn't matter, because that's not the issue the law is addressing. The issue is addressing what you did. You incited a panic without cause. Why is that bad? Well, because you're in a dark theater with limited exits. If I cause everybody in that theater to panic, people can get hurt as they stampede over each other to escape this mythical danger that doesn't exist. But you can't make it actually illegal. That's why you have to have without cause. Because if there actually is a fire, you want me to go fire, fire! That might cause people to panic. But I had cause. There was an actual fire. You see what I mean? Do you see what I'm getting at? The same thing applies to every law the government makes. The law must be in compliance with the Constitution, and the authority must be derived from the Constitution. That's the way our law is written. This is hard for people to understand because it hasn't been done like that for decades. They just pass whatever goddamn laws they want and declare them constitutional by fiat. And we have the Supreme Court that refuses to actually do their job because we don't have a Supreme Court anymore. There is no Supreme Court of the United States. It doesn't exist. Well, what's that thing? What are those justices? They're political appointments. They're political, activist judges placed there by one of the two political parties to do what they want instead of doing their job. Why do you think they waited till now to go after Roe v. Wade? Because they got enough political appointments in the court to possibly overturn it. Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. Doesn't matter whether it's constitutional. Part of being a sensible, reasonable, logical human being, part of being an adult, is being able to recognize, even if they're doing what I want them to do, the way they're doing it is wrong. A reasonable, sane, logical, constitutional, reasoned adult can do that. They can go, you know something? That's wrong. Even though I agree with what they're doing, that's wrong. They're not supposed to do that. It is not supported by law. But we have lost the ability to do that. You'll get people who will fight me tooth and nail. I'm going to have people in these comments who are going to fight me tooth and nail that I'm nuts, that I'm some sovereign citizen, that driving is a privilege, because they've been brainwashed for generations to think driving is a privilege, even though I can show with actual law right here and right here and right here that makes it clear that driving is a right. There's no question. This is not a gray area. This is not something that's up to interpretation. This is not something that's unclear. This is not something, well, I could see it both ways. No, this is black and white. Driving is a right. It's irrefutably a right. It's on its face a right. It's obviously and in your face, plainly and absolutely, constitutionally a right. And yet we allow them to convert it into a privilege. See, people, like I just told you a second ago, with the right to free speech, again, this is brainwashing and hyperpolarization through our society. People have a mental infarction. Your brain doesn't function right. You have a disconnect between right and responsibility. People seem to have this stupid asinine concept that having an absolute right means absolutely no responsibility. That's not true. I have an absolute right to carry this knife in my pocket down the street. I do not have the authority to stab you with it without cause. They are separate. Theoretically, they cannot make a law that says I can't carry this knife down the street. Theoretically, that's illegal. But they can make it illegal for me to stab you without cause. Absolute rights don't mean no responsibility. It means absolute responsibility. With absolute power comes absolute responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. What, did Stan Lee coin that, or did someone else coin that before him? I'm going to give it to Stan Lee, because he fucking deserves it. With great power comes great responsibility. And yet we've been brainwashed into thinking right means no responsibility? Where the hell did that even come from? You have a right to drive. Now, what would a driver's license look like in a proper constitutional right to drive society, which is what we should have. Well, I would go to the government and say, I want my driver's license. And the government would be required under law, without strings or attachments, to say, yes, sir, as long as you can do so safely. And what does that mean? Well, because driving is dangerous. So I have to show that I am capable of operating a vehicle safely. Like, let's say my cat Ender was a sentient being, and we declared him a person, and therefore he would have constitutional rights. Would you give a cat a driver's license? No! He can't reach the pedals, and he can't turn the steering wheel. So the cat, no matter how intelligent, no matter if he can sit here and talk to you like Sabrina's cat, he's not physically capable of operating a vehicle safely. Could they maybe make a cat vehicle that a cat could operate? Maybe, who knows? But a regular human vehicle, he can't operate. The same thing would apply to human beings. A license would have to be shall issue. Shall issue means the government doesn't have a choice. If I demand it, they must comply, unless they can show just cause, supported by provide for the common good. Is this the one? No. It is this one. So unless they can show they do derive authority under promote the general welfare, provide for the common good. Same thing. It means the same thing. It gets confused because we call it provide for the common good today, even though it's promote the general welfare. The words mean the same thing. So if they can show that I am not capable of operating a vehicle safely, they can then and only then deny me a license. But that also means they could never, ever revoke my license. Ever. My license would be good forever, unless they could show I was incapable of operating a vehicle safely. Multiple speeding tickets, you're showing an inability to operate a vehicle safely. DUIs, you're showing an inability to operate a vehicle safely. Okay? They have cause, because it is their duty to promote the general welfare. And you crashing into people drunk is one of the duties that they would perform under promoting the general welfare, just like stop signs and street lights and speed limits and the other laws that we have regarding driving. Where do they get the authority to do those things? Nothing in the Constitution says the federal government has the right to place stop signs, or the New Mexico government has the right to place red lights. Well, they derive it from promote the general welfare. Driving is dangerous. To make driving not as dangerous, we create a structure in which human beings can somewhat safely operate vehicles as long as everybody follows the rules. That's promote the general welfare. Revoking your driver's license because you didn't pay your child support or didn't pay a parking ticket does not promote the general welfare. That does not show you're incapable of driving a vehicle correctly. But that's why they do it. Because they know we have to drive. We live in a country where the vast majority of its population cannot exist without the ability to drive. So by converting that right to drive into a privilege to drive that they can now revoke for basically any goddamn reason they want, or threaten to revoke for any goddamn reason they want, they can now use that as a stick to beat you with to make you comply with other things that have nothing to do with your ability to drive. They do it because they know you need to drive. And so you'll do this because they know you need the car to do this. If you can't go to work, you die. You lose everything. So they use it as a bludgeon, which is not a delegated power. That's not something the government is supposed to be doing. And why anybody would disagree with me blows my mind. I mean, the only reason I can see anybody agreeing with me is because we are so hyperpolarized, we are so brainwashed, we are so gaslit by our own political parties that we see, okay, well, losing this right hurts the people I don't like more than it hurts me, so I'm okay with it. You people are sociopaths. There's something wrong with you. Get checked out, okay? If that's the way people think about this stuff, get checked out. You need mental help. It's supposed to be we the people of the United States, not we the state. They are supposed to be beholden to us. We are not supposed to be their subjects. They are supposed to be our employees to do as we tell them to do, under the terms that we give them to do it. And those terms aren't supposed to be what you want. Those terms are not supposed to be what you want or what I want. It's supposed to be what we as an aggregate want that is best for all of us. That is best for the entire country in line with the Constitution. That's what it's supposed to be. Which means you might have to let people do things you don't like. That's called growing up. That's called being an adult. This all stemmed from a discussion of implied consent, where if you don't submit to a breathalyzer or something like that on a DUI offense, that you could have your license revoked automatically. And my point is that's illegal. It's unconstitutional. That's one more case of you taking a right, converting it into a privilege, and using it as a bludgeon to force you to accept a violation of the Constitution. Because implied consent violates the 4th and 5th Amendment. It violates your right against unreasonable search and seizure, and it violates your right to not incriminate yourself, to not be witness against yourself, to not help the police do their job to convict you. The 5th Amendment says you don't have to do that. Yet implied consent makes you do that. Because they're holding a gun over your head. You don't think there's holding a gun over your head? Try driving after they suspend your license. See if the cop doesn't use that gun when you resist. The only reason the gun's not there is because you comply. And you comply because you know he has a gun and he'll use it. So yes, it's a gun to your head. And it's not supposed to be. It's a right, not a privilege. Rights are unlimited. What you do with them, your responsibility, is not unlimited. Great responsibility, or great power, great responsibility. So they are not allowed to convert your right to drive into a privilege. They are, however, allowed to require a driver's license, so long as that driver's license doesn't de facto convert your right into a privilege. They cannot make it a crime to exercise your right. Implied consent makes it a crime to exercise your 5th Amendment right, because there is a penalty if you say no. Therefore, they are converting your right into a crime, and that is on its face illegal. They're not allowed to do that. And for any of you to be okay with that tells me you have mental problems. You might not like hearing me say that. Too fucking bad. Grow up. Do better. And remember, ETP. Eat the politicians. It will fix so many problems. Things will change so fast if we just start eating them.